My parents demanded I move out of my own house so my unemployed brother could have it, so I gave them a 48-hour eviction notice. They thought I was bluffing, but they underestimated my preparedness and my rage. They never saw the trap I had been documenting for 3 years. This is where the story truly begins, and you won't want to miss what happens. Make sure you're subscribed to see it through to the end. We're always curious. Where in the world are you all watching from today? Let us know in the comments. The email from my doctor felt like a punch to the gut, the words further testing and abnormalities blurring into an incoherent soup of panic. I was sitting at my kitchen island, the granite cold beneath my forearms, trying to steady my breathing. At 36, I was a senior project manager for a major construction firm. I managed $100 million budgets, oversaw teams of engineers, and navigated the complex egos of developers and city planners. I was the one who fixed problems, who anticipated risks. But this was a structural failure inside my own body, and I had no blueprint for it. My hand was still trembling when my parents, Brenda and Kyle, walked into the kitchen, followed by my younger brother, Ryan. They were laughing about a video Ryan had shown them on his phone. "Oh, Elizabeth, you're home early," my mother, Brenda, said, not as a question, but as a flat observation. She glanced at the half-full glass of water in my hand, her lips pursed in that familiar, subtly critical way. "Just got in," I managed to say, my voice thinner than I liked. "Good," she said, pulling out a chair. "Kyle, Ryan, sit down. We wanted to talk to you, Elizabeth. It's a family meeting." A family meeting was Brenda's term for an edict. It was never a discussion, it was a pronouncement. "What's going on?" I asked, trying to push aside the cold dread from the doctor's email to make room for the more familiar, low-grade anxiety my family specialized in. "Well," Brenda began, smoothing the front of her blouse, "your father and I have been talking, and we've decided it's time for a change." I looked at my father, Kyle. He was 62, a man who had once been boisterous and full of life, but had long since become a passive echo of my mother's stronger personality. He simply nodded, his eyes fixed on the salt shaker as if it held the secrets to the universe. My brother Ryan, however, was practically vibrating with a smug, self-satisfied energy. At 25, he was the perpetually misunderstood golden child, a recent college graduate in a field he'd changed 3 times who was exploring his options, which, for the last 8 months, meant sleeping until noon and trying to become a video game streamer. "Ryan is ready to take the next step in his life," Brenda continued, her voice taking on the saccharine tone she used when she was about to ask for something outrageous. "He needs his own space to grow, to build his brand. He can't do that cooped up." I blinked, confused. Cooped up, he has the entire second-floor guest suite. I had it rewired for his computers. "Don't be difficult, Elizabeth," she snapped. "It's not about the suite, it's about the house. This house." A slow, cold understanding began to creep up my spine, far colder than the medical fear. "What about this house?" I said, my voice hardening. "My house." "Exactly," Brenda said, smiling as if I'd finally solved a clever riddle. "It's too big for you, you're always at work. And now with whatever is going on with your health," she waved a hand dismissively, as if my potential illness was just an inconvenient scheduling conflict. "You should be downsizing, focusing on that." "What are you saying, Mom?" "We're saying," my father, Kyle, finally spoke, his voice mild, "that it's time for you to find a nice apartment. Something smaller, more manageable for a single woman. Ryan needs a proper start. He needs this house." I stared at them. The blood drained from my face, and the doctor's email was momentarily forgotten, replaced by a roaring in my ears. 3 years. For 3 years, they had lived here in my house, rent-free. After their luxury boutique went bankrupt, wiping out their savings, I had taken them in. I paid the mortgage off 5 years ago, a milestone I'd celebrated alone. For 3 years, I had paid every single bill: the property taxes, the utilities, the groceries, the high-speed internet for Ryan's career. I had paid for everything. And now they weren't asking. They were telling me to leave my own home. You want me to move out? I whispered, the words tasting like ash. Yes, Brenda said, her smile unwavering. It's the practical solution. We'll stay on, of course, to help Ryan manage the property. He deserves a good start, Elizabeth. You're already established. It's only fair. Ryan, who hadn't said a single word, just smirked and leaned back, crossing his arms. It was the look of a prince who had just been handed his kingdom. The panic from the doctor's email evaporated, replaced by something else. A sudden, terrifying clarity. It was the same feeling I got on a job site just before I found a critical flaw in the plans, a moment of absolute, ice-cold focus. They saw me as an obstacle, an inconvenient tenant in my own life. I looked at their expectant, entitled faces, my mother's smugness, my father's weak avoidance, my brother's lazy triumph. And I felt the last, fragile thread of familial duty snap. The betrayal was worse than the diagnosis. The silence that followed my mother's pronouncement was heavy and suffocating. It was broken only by the hum of the refrigerator, a sound that I was suddenly, acutely aware I paid for. I looked at the three of them, a tribunal seated at my kitchen island, and felt a strange, chilling detachment. It was as if I were a project manager watching a build site from behind a glass window, seeing the structural flaws in real time. An apartment, I repeated, my voice flat. You want me to find an apartment? Exactly, Brenda said, clapping her hands together softly, as if I were a slow child who had finally understood a simple concept. Something with a concierge, perhaps. You work so hard, you deserve to have things taken care of. We've even been looking online for you. There are some lovely one-bedrooms in that new high-rise downtown. You'd love the view. The audacity of it was breathtaking. They had been researching my new, smaller life while living in my current, larger one. And Ryan, I turned to my brother, who was now idly scrolling through his phone, already bored with the meeting. You're okay with this, taking my house? He shrugged, not looking up. It's not taking it, Liz, it's just, smarter, you're never here, I'd actually use the space. It's a good investment for my brand. His brand, I said. The words hung in the air. His brand consisted of 74 followers on a streaming platform, half of whom were suspected to be bots he'd bought with the allowance I still gave my parents, which they undoubtedly passed on to him. Don't be like that, Elizabeth, Kyle, my father, chimed in, finally making eye contact. His gaze was pleading. We just want what's best for everyone. You've been so stressed lately. A change would do you good. A fresh start for all of us. That was the word they'd used. Start. Ryan deserved a better start. My 36-year-old self, with a terrifying medical email burning a hole in my inbox, was apparently past the point of needing a start. I was in my finish phase, meant to be tidied away into a one-bedroom apartment. I see, I said. I stood up, my chair scraping lightly against the tiled floor. The movement was sudden enough to make all three of them look at me. I need to process this. It's a lot to take in. Of course, dear, Brenda said, her smile tightening. She clearly expected an argument, a tantrum, tears. My calmness seemed to unnerve her. Take your time, but we should probably get the realtor to look at this place by the end of the week just to see what it's really worth. And you'll want to start packing. I nodded, my face a mask of polite consideration. You're right, I do need to start packing. I walked out of the kitchen, my footsteps measured. I didn't go to my bedroom. I went to my home office. I closed the heavy oak door and locked it. For a moment, I leaned my forehead against the cool wood, the adrenaline and the betrayal and the fear all warring within me. The email from my doctor was still open on my laptop. The house was supposed to be my sanctuary, the one place in the world I was safe. It was the physical manifestation of 2 decades of grueling work, of being the first on site and the last to leave, of battling sexism in a male-dominated industry, of sacrificing relationships and personal time. I had bought this house at 28, a feat that had made my parents swell with a strange, possessive pride. Now, that pride had curdled into pure, unadulterated entitlement. I sat down at my desk, my spine rigid. I took a deep breath, pushing the medical fears into a box. I could only handle one crisis at a time, and the one in my kitchen was more immediate. I opened my laptop. I didn't look at the medical portal. I opened a different file. It was a password-protected, encrypted spreadsheet I had named Household Ledger 2022. It had tabs for 2023, 2024, and the current year. For 3 years, I had meticulously documented everything. My profession had made me pathologically organized. Every utility bill, every property tax payment, every Costco receipt for the mountains of food they consumed, every cash transfer I'd sent them for incidentals. It was all there, with dates, amounts, and scanned receipts. I had started it in the beginning, thinking it would be a temporary record, just to track how much their fresh start was costing. I'd told myself it was just for my own budgeting. But as the months turned into a year, and then 2, and their gratitude faded into expectation, the spreadsheet had become something else. It had become my insurance. They lived in my house, but there was no lease. They were not tenants, they were guests. Long-term, incredibly expensive guests. I looked at the grand total at the bottom of the 2024 tab. It was staggering. It was more than a down payment. It was a college education. It was a small business. My family thought they were ousting a tenant. They thought they were dealing with stressed Elizabeth, the dutiful daughter who would eventually just cry and give in. They had forgotten who I was. They had forgot I was the woman who built things, and who also knew, better than anyone, how to handle a demolition. A new thought, sharp and clear, cut through my anger. They had forgotten one crucial thing. They thought this was their house. They had forgotten it was my asset. And as a project manager, I never, ever let someone else control my assets. I saved a copy of the spreadsheet to a thumb drive. I opened a new email and attached it, sending it to my personal attorney with the subject line, "Urgent, please review." Then I started to type. To understand the sheer, blinding audacity of my mother's family meeting, you have to understand my family's mythology. The central theme, repeated since my childhood, was that I was the lucky one, the practical one. Ryan was the special one, the dreamer. My practicality, it was implied, existed to finance his dreams. This house was the perfect example. When I bought it, I was 28. I'd been working 60-hour weeks since I'd graduated, climbing the ladder at my construction firm with a relentless, single-minded focus. This house wasn't luck. It was the result of spreadsheets, disciplined saving, and foregoing almost all personal luxuries. It was a 4-bedroom colonial in a quiet, leafy suburb, a symbol of stability. When my parents, Brenda and Kyle, lost their business 3 years ago, I didn't hesitate. Their boutique, B&K's Finery, had been a monument to their worst impulses, overpriced, poorly managed, and funded by a series of loans they couldn't service. The financial ruin they'd faced wasn't a lightning strike. It was a slow, predictable collapse of ego and bad math. But they were my parents, so I opened my doors. "Stay as long as you need," I'd said. "Get back on your feet." The first few months were fine. My mother, Brenda, reorganized my pantry, a task I hadn't had time for, and my father, Kyle, took up gardening in the backyard. But getting back on their feet quickly translated into getting comfortable on my couch. Brenda, 61 but with the imperious energy of a dowager queen, had a resume that was 20 years out of date, and an attitude that suggested she was too good for any job that didn't involve consulting on high-end fashion. Kyle, a year older, was a man hollowed out by my mother's disapproval. He just followed. He fixed leaky faucets and then sat in the den, watching old westerns, a ghost in my hallways. Then, 8 months ago, Ryan had graduated and moved in, and the entire dynamic shifted from passive dependence to active entitlement. Ryan, at 25, was my mother's masterpiece. He was handsome, charming in a shallow way, and profoundly, deeply lazy. He had been told his entire life that his potential was a form of currency. He didn't need to work, he just needed to be. His profession was a joke. He claimed to be a content creator, an influencer, a day trader. In reality, he was a consumer. He consumed my high-speed internet, my electricity, and my food. He was a black hole of resources. The primary antagonist, however, was always my mother. Brenda was the one who stoked the fires. She was the one who saw my success not as a source of pride, but as a resource to be tapped. My house wasn't a home, it was a holding, and she was the acting CEO. I remember a conversation a few weeks ago, a perfect piece of foreshadowing I'd ignored. I'd come home late from a site inspection, covered in dust, to find Brenda and Ryan in the kitchen, sipping wine that I'd bought. "Elizabeth, darling," Brenda had said, not looking up from a magazine. "That car of yours is looking a little drab. It's not a good look for a woman in your position." I drove a reliable 5-year-old SUV. "It gets me to work, Mom." "Yes, but Ryan was saying, your brand is important. He's trying to build his brand, and it's hard for him to be creative when he's picked up from his networking events and that." "He can get a rideshare," I'd said, baffled. "Don't be silly, he's your brother," she'd countered, as if that explained everything. "He was thinking, and I agree, that you should probably lease him a new car, a nice white sedan. It's a tax write-off for you, I'm sure." I had laughed, thinking she was joking. Was not. The conversation ended with her sighing about my lack of family feeling. My sacrifices were not viewed as gifts, they were logged as investments they were entitled to. My home was just the biggest line item. My mother's vague, polished appearance, always dressed in clothes I'd paid for, her hair perfectly coiffed from a salon I'd funded with pocket money I gave her, was a facade. Underneath it was a disingenuous, grasping desperation. She had failed in her own life, and now she was determined to run mine, to correct her past failures by liquidating my assets. She had convinced herself and my father that my success was a fluke, a bank account they were all meant to draw from. And in her mind, Ryan, the special, dreaming boy, was the one who truly deserved it. I was just the practical, lucky one. I was just the bank. And the bank, in her opinion, was overdue to be robbed. That night, after the family meeting, as I sat in my locked office, I finally understood. This wasn't a misunderstanding. It was a hostile takeover. The morning after the family meeting was one of the strangest of my life. I woke up at 5:00 a.m., my usual time, but not from my alarm. I woke up from a place of pure, cold resolve. The doctor's email, the abnormalities, were still a fog of fear in the back of my mind, but the immediate threat, the one sleeping in the guest suite down the hall, had pushed its way to the front. I went through my morning routine with mechanical precision. I put on my running gear and went out for a 3-mile run, the crisp morning air doing nothing to cool the simmering anger in my chest. When I got back, the house was still silent. They all slept in, of course. Their lives of leisure, funded by me, required a full 8 to 10 hours. This was the moment. My shift from victim to strategist was as clean as a surveyor's line. I was no longer a daughter managing a family dispute. I was a project manager handling a team of saboteurs. The clever trap wasn't just the spreadsheet. That was just the invoice. The trap was the law. They were tenants at will, or, more accurately, licensees. They had no lease, they paid no rent. They had the legal standing of a house guest who had overstayed their welcome by 1,095 days. Their demand that I leave was not just absurd, it was a stunning act of self-immolation. While the coffee brewed, I sat at my desk and pulled up the file my lawyer, David, had sent back to me at 11:30 p.m. last night. David was a pit bull, a man who specialized in real estate and contract law, and he'd been my attorney for years. His reply had been concise. "Elizabeth, this is insane, but they've given you a gift. Their verbal demand to you constitutes a clear break. We have them. What do you want to do?" I had replied with a single sentence. "I want them out, legally, immediately." Now I was executing the plan. The investigation phase was already complete, thanks to my 3 years of meticulous record-keeping. The household ledger file was my entire case. It totaled 81,450.22. That number, I thought, looking at it, was a grotesque monument to my own misplaced generosity. I printed out the summary page. Then I printed out a second document, a formal, legally vetted notice. It wasn't a 30-day notice to quit required for tenants. This was different. David had called it a notice to revoke license and demand to vacate. It stated that as non-paying licensees, their invitation to be on the property was hereby revoked, and they had 48 hours to remove themselves and their belongings. I heard footsteps upstairs. My mother, Brenda, coming down for her morning latte. I stood up, holding the two pieces of paper. This wasn't just a confrontation, it was a severance. Brenda entered the kitchen, wrapped in a plush silk robe I'd bought her last Christmas. She smiled at me, a bright, false smile. "Good morning, dear. I slept so well. I was dreaming about the new color palette for this kitchen. Ryan thinks a nice, clean white." "Good morning, Mom," I said, my voice perfectly even. I held out the papers. "This is for you, and Dad, and Ryan. You should probably all read it together." Her smile faltered. She took the papers, her eyes scanning the first one, the notice to vacate. Her face went from confused to indignant. "What is this? Elizabeth, this isn't funny. 48 hours? You can't be serious, we're your family." "This is not a joke," I said, my voice as hard as the granite countertop. "This is a legal notice. You have 48 hours to vacate my property. That means 9:00 a.m. on Wednesday." "You can't do this," she shrieked, her voice climbing. We'll sue you, we have rights." "No, actually, you don't," I said, tapping the second piece of paper she was still holding, the ledger summary. "That's the second part of your choice. It's an invoice." She looked down at it, her brow furrowed. "What? $81,000? What is this nonsense?" "That," I said, "is a highly itemized bill for 3 years of lodging, food, utilities, taxes, and incidentals. That is what you owe me." Just then my father and Ryan stumbled into the kitchen, drawn by the noise. "What's going on?" Kyle asked, rubbing sleep from his eyes. "Elizabeth is throwing us out," Brenda screeched, thrusting the papers at him. "She's gone insane." Ryan just laughed. "What, like, I'm mad at you throwing us out? Come on, Liz, what's the big deal?" "Here's the deal, Ryan," I said, turning my full attention to him. "You have 2 options. Option A, you are all packed and off my property by 9:00 a.m. on Wednesday. You walk away, and I will forgive the $81,450 debt you've incurred. We call it a clean break." I paused, letting that sink in. "And option B?" my father asked, his voice a terrified whisper. "Option B," I said, my voice dropping, "is that you are not gone. At 9:01 a.m. on Wednesday, my lawyer, who is on standby, files this eviction notice and a civil suit against all 3 of you for the full $81,000, plus legal fees. I will garnish wages, if you ever get any. I will put a lien on any property you ever try to buy. I will ensure you never get back on your feet, because you will be spending the rest of your lives paying me back." The kitchen was silent. The color had drained from Brenda's face. My father looked like he was going to be sick. Ryan, for the first time, looked scared. His smug smirk was gone, replaced by a look of wild, dawning horror. You wouldn't," my mother whispered. "You demanded I leave my own house so my unemployed brother could build his brand," I shot back. "You sat there, after I've supported you for 3 years, and told me to get out. You have 47 hours and 58 minutes to discover just how serious I am." The immediate aftermath of my announcement was pure, glorious chaos. My mother, Brenda, was the first to break the stunned silence. She did not, as I expected, dissolve into tears or apologies. Instead, she doubled down on the one emotion she knew: indignation. $81,000, she shrieked, the ledger summary trembling in her hand. How dare you put a price on family, on the food we've shared? This is obscene." "You're right," I said, my voice dangerously calm. I took a sip of my coffee. "It is obscene. It's an obscene amount of money for 3 adults to expect one person to pay for them, and then to have the audacity to kick that person out of her own home." "We didn't mean kick out," my father, Kyle, stammered, wringing his hands. He was desperately trying to reframe the narrative. We meant a transition, a discussion. We were just brainstorming. You brainstormed a new life for me in a one-bedroom apartment while you divvied up my assets, I countered. You told me to start packing. That's not a discussion, Dad. That's a directive. But this list, Brenda was back, pointing at the paper. Internet? You're charging us for internet. We're your parents. Ryan is your brother. This is what you do for family. No, Mom, I said, setting my mug down with a definitive click. This is what I did. What you do for family, apparently, is try to steal their house. And I'm done. The charity is over. Ryan, who had been pale and silent, finally found his voice. It was cracked with an unfamiliar panic. You're crazy, Liz. You're not going to sue us. You'd be a laughingstock. Woman sues her own parents. You'd be humiliated. It was a poorly executed threat, a child's understanding of consequences. He was trying to shame me back into compliance. Am I? I raised an eyebrow. Or would the story be dutiful daughter, after supporting her ungrateful family for 3 years, is forced to take legal action after they try to make her homeless? I'm a project manager, Ryan. I'm very, very good at framing a narrative. And unlike you, I have documentation. This was the key reveal. The spreadsheet wasn't just a number. It was a 3-year-long, dated, and itemized story of their entitlement. They thought my generosity was a weakness. They were only now discovering it was a meticulously documented trap. Brenda's face crumpled. This was not the script. She was supposed to be the matriarch graciously accepting the keys to her new kingdom. Instead, she was a non-tenant being served with an eviction notice. You've been tracking us, she whispered, and for the first time, I heard real, genuine shock in her voice. The cold-blooded nature of the spreadsheet, the act of my having recorded their every expense, was what truly horrified her. It was proof that I hadn't been a passive victim, I had been an accountant. I track all my projects, I said simply, and this project is now officially over budget and cancelled. The clock is ticking. My father was the one who finally broke. He sank into a kitchen chair and put his head in his hands. Brenda, my God, what have we done? She's right. Oh, God, she's right. No, Brenda wheeled on him. Don't you dare side with her. She is ungrateful. After everything after everything. She couldn't finish the sentence. After everything what? After everything they had taken. Ryan's reaction was the most telling. His fear was already morphing back into his default setting, petulance. Fine, we'll go, but you can't expect us to find a place in 48 hours. That's insane. We'll need at least a month. And you'll have to give us money for the deposit. I almost laughed. The entitlement was so deeply ingrained it was reflexive. You have 48 hours, not a minute more, I said. And as for money, I believe I've given you enough. In fact, I'd say I've given you 81,450.22 too much. I picked up my briefcase, walked to the front door, and slipped on my shoes. I have to go to work, I said, opening the door. I have a project to manage. I suggest you start one of your own. It's called packing. I've left a box of heavy-duty trash bags by the recycling bin. You'll need them. I left them standing in the kitchen, the legal papers on the granite island between them. A ticking bomb that had finally, satisfyingly, gone off. I spent the rest of that day at my construction site, my phone buzzing in my pocket. I ignored it. The physical reality of my job, the smell of concrete and sawdust, the roar of machinery, the tangible progress of steel rising from the ground, was a welcome antidote to the rot that had taken over my home. I was building something real, while they were trying to tear down what I had already built. When I got home at 7:00 p.m., the house was eerily silent, but it wasn't empty. The first thing I saw was that my mother had made a desperate, pathetic attempt to regain control. She had gone into my office. The door, which I had left unlocked, was ajar. Inside, my desk drawers were open. She had been looking for something. A will, a deed, some imaginary document she could use as leverage. It was a clumsy, desperate move. All my important documents, The deed, my passport, my financial statements were in a safe deposit box. The only thing on my desk was my work laptop, which was password protected and encrypted. Looking for something, I asked from the doorway. Brenda jumped, her hand flying to her chest. She was standing by my file cabinet. I was looking for a pen. You were in my private office, in my private drawers, looking for a pen, I said, my voice dead flat. You are trespassing, Mom, in a house you've been legally asked to vacate. Don't you use that tone with me, she snapped, falling back on her only defense. I am still your mother. And you are still a guest with 35 hours left on the clock, I retorted. Get out of my office. She fled, her pride wounded, but my point had been made. The power dynamic had been permanently severed. The true escalation, however, came from Ryan. He was still struggling with his loyalty, or rather, with the cognitive dissonance of his special status being revoked. He found me in the kitchen, where I was making a simple salad for dinner. You're really going to do this? He asked, his tone halfway between a plea and a threat. You're going to make us homeless, your own family. I'm not making you anything, I said, not looking at him as I chopped a cucumber. You made a choice when you agreed with Mom's plan. This is the consequence. She's just worried about me, he said, his voice rising. You've always had it easy, Liz. You're good at all this. This work stuff. It's harder for me. I have to think about my image. Your image? I finally turned to him, the knife in my hand. Your image is that of a 25-year-old man living off his sister who then tries to steal her house. That's not an image, Ryan, that's a failure. The word hit him like a physical slap. He'd never been called that before. You're just jealous, he spat, his face turning an ugly shade of red. You're jealous because Mom and Dad have always cared about you more, I finished for him. You're right, they have, and look at the result. I'm a self-made woman who owns her own home. You're an unemployed child who's about to be homeless. You can have their love, I'll keep my house. The final, irrefutable proof wasn't a document, it was a phone call. The next morning, 24 hours into the 48-hour notice, my father cornered me by the garage. He was a broken man. Elizabeth, he whispered, his eyes red. Please, don't do this. Your mother, she's not well. She's just so disappointed in how her life turned out. She wanted what you have. She wanted what I have, I repeated, so she decided to just take it. We made a mistake, he pleaded, reaching out to touch my arm. I stepped back. You made a plan, I corrected him, and it backfired. But thank you, Dad, you've just confirmed my case. What case? My lawyer David, I said, Justin C. This went to court. He wanted to prove malicious intent. Your wife snooping in my office, Ryan demanding a deposit, and now you admitting that your brainstorming was a deliberate attempt to take my property because you were disappointed in your own lives. It's a slam dunk. The case is built. My father's face went ashen. He wasn't just losing a free house. He was realizing he had been outmaneuvered at every single turn. The spell my mother had woven around him, the fantasy that they were a wronged, noble family, was broken by the cold, hard reality of my spreadsheet and my lawyer. What do we do? He asked, his voice a child's. You have 24 hours, Kyle, I said, using his name. It felt foreign but correct. I'd suggest you stop talking and start packing. The desperate attempts to regain control had failed. The investigation was complete. The case was built. All that was left was the eviction. The final morning dawned bright and clear. Wednesday, 8:00 a.m. I had taken the day off work. I sat in my living room on my sofa, drinking my coffee. The house was a disaster zone. For the last 36 hours, my family had operated in a state of frenzied, disorganized panic. There was no teamwork, only accusations. I'd heard them arguing late into the night. Brenda blamed Kyle for not being a better provider. Kyle blamed Brenda for her pride. They both blamed Ryan for being a useless burden. And Ryan, in turn, blamed them all for ruining his life. It was the sound of rats fighting in a trap of their own making. At 8:30 a.m., Ryan emerged, dragging a massive suitcase. "I found a place," he mumbled, his eyes on the floor. "A room with 3 other guys." "I'm happy for you, Ryan," I said, my voice neutral. "You're finally building your brand." He flinched and hurried out the door, not looking back. He didn't say goodbye, he didn't thank me, he just left, one down. At 8:45 a.m., my parents came down the main staircase. They were dragging 2 suitcases each. Their lives, it turned out, could be condensed quite easily when they weren't living off mine. My mother's face was a mask of furious, tear-streaked pride. My father just looked old. "So this is it," Brenda said, her voice shaking with rage. "You're really doing it. You're throwing your own mother and father out onto the street." "I am not," I said, standing up. I set my coffee mug down. "I am reclaiming my property, as I am legally entitled to do. You found a place to go." My father had, in a moment of sheer desperation, called his sister, my Aunt Clara, a woman my mother despised and had not spoken to in a decade. Aunt Clara, upon hearing that her brother was about to be literally on the street, had grudgingly offered them her spare room in her tiny, 2-bedroom condo an hour away. Your aunt's," Kyle stammered, his face red with the humiliation. Just until." "You get back on your feet," I finished. "A fresh start, I'm sure it will work out this time." The silence was deafening. The public showdown wasn't a crowded room. It was this, right here. The 4 walls of the home I had paid for, bearing witness. My mother, Brenda, looked around the foyer, at the hardwood floors I'd refinished, at the chandelier I'd picked out. This was her last stand. "You will regret this, Elizabeth," she hissed, her eyes narrowing. "One day you will be old and you will be alone, and you will call us, and we will not answer." It was meant to be a curse. It sounded like a promise. "Okay," I said. That one word, so calm, so final, broke her. She let out a sound, a frustrated guttural sob, and grabbed the handle of her suitcase. "Kyle, let's go. I cannot breathe this ungrateful air for one more second." My father paused at the door. He looked at me, his eyes filled with a lifetime of weakness and regret. He opened his mouth, as if to say something, an apology, an excuse, a final plea. I just looked at him, my expression unyielding. I was no longer his daughter. I was the project manager, and he was a contractor who had failed to deliver. He closed his mouth. He turned, picked up his bag, and followed his wife out the door. I watched them load their bags into their old, sputtering car. I watched them drive away. At 8:59 a.m., my property was clear. At 9:00 a.m., I closed the front door. At 9:01 a.m., I engaged the deadbolt, and then I walked through my house. My house. The guest suite reeked of Ryan's body spray. My parents' room had a few pieces of trash they'd been too proud to pack. I went to my phone. I didn't call my lawyer. I called a cleaning service. And then I called a locksmith. And as I sat there, in the sudden, absolute, and beautiful silence of my own home, I opened my laptop and finally, clicked on the email from my doctor's office to schedule my follow-up tests. Whatever happened next, I would face it. Alone and free. The downfall of my family was not a dramatic explosion. It was a quiet, definite crumbling. The locksmith arrived by 10:00 a.m. The sound of the drill changing the tumblers was the most satisfying sound I had ever heard. By noon, a team of professional cleaners had descended. They scrubbed, steamed, and ozoned every trace of my family out of the house. When they left, the air itself felt lighter. The first few weeks were a strange adjustment. The silence was absolute. I would come home from work and instinctively brace for an argument, a passive-aggressive comment, or a request for money. But there was nothing, just peace. My follow-up tests came back. The abnormalities were benign cysts, stress-induced, my doctor suggested. The irony was not lost on me. I had cut out the 300-pound tumor of my family, and my body was already thanking me for it. About a month after the eviction, I received a call from my Aunt Clara. Elizabeth, she said, her voice weary, I wanted to say thank you. For what? I asked, confused. For giving me the full story, she said. Your father, he and Brenda are parasites. She tried to tell me you were the monster, but I've known Brenda for 40 years. And then I saw that spreadsheet you'd sent David, who forwarded it to me. My God, child, they're staying in my spare room and I've already had to lock up my credit cards. They haven't changed. The antagonist's downfall was precisely what they deserved: social exile. Aunt Clara, armed with my documentation, had called every other relative and set the record straight. There were no more couches to surf, no more lines of credit to open. Brenda and Kyle were, for the first time, truly on their own. The last I heard, Kyle had taken a job as a part-time greeter at a hardware store, and Brenda was applying for cashier positions. Ryan's brand imploded. His roommates, it turned out, were not interested in funding his lifestyle. He lasted 2 months before he, too, had to get a job stocking shelves on the night shift at a local grocery store. The reconciliation I sought was not with them, it was with myself. I redecorated the guest suite, turning it into a beautiful home gym and meditation space. I reclaimed my office. I bought a new, plush sofa for the living room and binge-watched shows without anyone complaining about the noise. 6 months later, David, my lawyer, called. You're not going to believe this, he said, and I could hear the laugh in his voice. They tried to file a suit: wrongful eviction and emotional distress. You're kidding, I said, not at all surprised. It was thrown out before it even saw a desk, he said. The judge apparently laughed, but that's not why I'm calling. The civil suit we filed, the $81,001, they're terrified. They want to settle. Settle with what? They're proposing a payment plan, $100 a month, for the rest of their natural-born lives. I thought about it. I thought about the legal fees, the stress, the principle. Then I thought about my peace. David, I said, tell them I'll accept, but on one condition. The agreement includes a permanent, legally binding no-contact order. They are never to call, text, email, or come within 500 feet of me or my property ever again. He agreed. The papers were signed. My peace was now legally codified. My life is quiet now. My work is challenging and fulfilling. I'm finally dating a good man, someone who respects my boundaries and admires my strength. My house is a sanctuary. Sometimes I look at that $100 monthly deposit in my bank account. It's not about the money, it's a reminder. A 1,300-word story of its own, written in dollars and cents. It's the price of my freedom. And it's a debt they will never, ever be able to fully repay. But I am, at last, vindicated. And I am finally, completely at peace.